and we have a good friend, Jada Yoder. Did I say it right? Did I get it right?
Just say Yoder.
Okay, Yoder, Jada Yoder. And she is coming from Ohio. And Jada, you've been with Giant and been doing consulting for how long?
3 years. 3 years in August.
What's a recent win or aha that you've had or a client's had?
Oh man. Yeah, I had a client. Well, actually, yeah, I have an intensive client who came in pretty lacking in self-awareness, I would say. And so we did a 3-month sprint, just 2 sessions a month in intensives, really trying to get in content and grow in that like self-awareness portion. And by the end of it, the support challenge matrix had become such a part of his consciousness. And he was able to not only place himself as a dominator, but also give me natural next steps for him in multiple relationships in his life. He had come in specifically for work. His workplace had experienced the dominator part of him, that high challenge, low support culture that he had really been permeating. And by the end of it, he was like, I see how this is relevant with my wife. I see how this is relevant with my kids. I see how this comes out in my coaching. I mean, he was like able to see, okay, in every sphere of influence, I've been putting out this domineering and dominating leadership. And to start to like course correct. Natural next steps became a huge part of our conversation.
Yep.
And I've been celebrating that for
Yes.
like 2 months. That was huge.
That's awesome. That's great. Those huge moments of revelation, something that I think is really important to understand, especially in this kind of work and just as we lead others, is being able to hold up mirrors for other people and calling them up to see themselves. That self-awareness, the not just the emotional intelligence aspect, but the awareness of the culture that they're creating or permeating. Yeah, those moments of revelation, instead of just telling them that they're doing it, those are going to stick. And yeah, it's going to permeate everything. That's awesome. Well done. So tell us what tool we got today, and go ahead and start taking us through it.
Absolutely. So hello, everyone. Like John said, my name is Jada. I've been a Giant Guide now for going on 3 years. This language just has always made sense to me. I think that's one of my favorite things about Giant. I loved hearing like some of Skylar's experience of just secondhand through Eddie, really absorbing the content. One of my like favorite C.S. Lewis quotes that comes from the Chronicles of Narnia is like, the further in you go, the bigger it gets. That's how I feel about Giant. Truly, you start to come in, maybe it was the 5 voices, or maybe it was a specific tool. In these toolkit sessions, maybe it was just one that started to make sense to your brain. And the further in you go, the bigger it gets. You start to apply it. You start to share that language with the people in your life. And now what was about work is now about your marriage, or is now about your home life, is now about your community. There's truly a limitless number of ways that you can apply it and grow within it. And so I love teaching it. I'm really honored that Eddie and John wanted me to come into this space, and I'm bringing what I consider to be one of the power tools. There are a few of the tools that I personally am very biased towards, that I think are just, of all of the tools, if there's one that's going to pack a punch, some of them are just so applicable, are so real time for people that I call them the power tools. And so I chose one of those for us today. I'll go ahead and share my screen so that you can see it, and we'll get started. All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Wonderful. Let's do it. All right. So this tool is called the change equation. And the goal of the tool is to get very real time in your life. And so as I start to teach it and kind of talk out loud about it, I really encourage you to be taking notes and figuring out, I'll give hypotheticals and I'll give some of my client examples, but really start to think through, how does this apply in your current reality? How does this work in your organization, with your family, with the places and spheres that you lead in? But the entire goal of the change equation is to overcome resistance. So I will explain the equation by starting first on the right side. The thing that we are trying to overcome is resistance. That might be a gap, right? It might be that there's a literal personnel gap on your team. You know, we can only go so far before we have HR. We can only go so far before we have somebody who's doing internal development. We can only go so far without a public relations specialist. Whatever that gap may be, it could also be a hurdle in your business, right? It's just going to take a little bit of effort. If we could just have the time, if we just had the capacity, we could probably overcome this, right? It could be a lot of different things, but there's an importance in understanding what your resistance is and then doing the backwards work to say, okay, how can we actually overcome that? So for us, we will go through 3 different variables to help you figure out what's actually going to truthfully overcome resistance in whatever area you're leading in. And that starts with the D variable, which is dissatisfaction with the status quo. This is one that I think often gets skipped. When I've been working with clients, oftentimes the question that I ask, that I also ask on our team a lot, is, are we solving problems that don't exist? Like, are we just innovating for the sake of innovation? Is there a bit of like the creative bug? We have a lot of ENFPs on this call, a lot of ENTPs, right? A lot of people that love to innovate, that love to dream, that love to create. And as a result, there is a little bit that sometimes we solve problems that we don't actually have a real dissatisfaction with. And so you want to make sure before you're figuring out, okay, what am I going to do about this? Is there a real dissatisfaction? Is your team feeling the pain and the tension from this? Are your clients feeling the pain and the tension? Is this dissatisfaction something that would go away, or is it a genuine dissatisfaction with where you currently are? Otherwise, you might be solving problems that don't exist. There might actually not be all that much resistance. You're just trying to innovate, which isn't a bad thing. But when you follow that down the path a little too far, you find that people can't really trust you. They don't trust that you will actually establish things. They think that you will just always pull the carpet out from under them and create something new, right? So you want to be careful, and you want to make sure that you can define dissatisfaction. If I were to come to you and say, okay, you're experiencing this resistance, tell me what the pain is. You should be able to very specifically tell me what the pain is. What's going to happen if you don't, right? What's the cost if you don't go through with this? And that will define your dissatisfaction. Right, so then we go on dissatisfaction times V. V is vision of the future. It's one thing to have dissatisfaction with the status quo, and another to have a vision for what this is actually going to look like when the problem is solved. Those of us that are natural visionaries, we're like, oh, I always have a vision. I always see what this could be, what this should be, what at its best it could possibly become. But for some of the voices, for some of the people that don't naturally do that, vision's a really hard part of this equation. That might take some outsourcing. That might take some help from some strategic partners to say, hey, what do we really want this to look like? What could this be at its best, right? Whatever that resistance is that we're overcoming, we need to have a strong vision to combat that with. So we need to know, what does this look like in a year if we're able to solve this? You know, what would our capacity grow to? Maybe it is filling that kind of role, like an HR role. So it's like, okay, so then what do our processes look like a year from now? And how does that vision address the pain and the dissatisfaction that I currently have? Your vision should be specific. It shouldn't just be, oh, if I'm able to get everything that I need, then everything would be great and we would make more money. Like, it's a fine vision, but it's not specific enough, right? You should be able to tell me, what's the vision 6 months from now if we implement this? What is it going to look like? What's our day-to-day going to be? What is the client interface going to change to be like? And then you should be able to tell me a year and probably 3 years. I don't go far past 3, because then, I mean, pie in the sky, right? We're just kind of guessing. But if we're doing 6 month, 1 year, 3 years, you should be able to tell me what your vision is and how it's adapting as you go. That's D and that's V. And then we pair it with the third variable, which is N, the natural next step. This is often where a lot of our visionaries are like, great, here's where I delegate it, right? I told you what the pain was. I told you what the gain was. Now you go and implement it, right? But there should be a certain amount of discipline that any person, any leader who's answering these variables should take ownership in what the natural next step is. So if 10 is our vision and we're in 0 right now, you should be able to say, all right, our natural next step is at 1. What is the one thing that you can implement right now that you can start to research that you can start to source from other people. What kind of collaborations could you begin right now to take one natural next step towards that ultimate vision and to address the current dissatisfaction? Without a natural next step, we will just repeat D and V. We'll just keep saying, oh, I'm so discontent with what's happening, and I have such great plans for the future, and I have no idea what to do from there, right? That's not going to overcome resistance. You're just going to keep saying, I'm dissatisfied, and I have big dreams. And that's fine, but it doesn't accomplish anything, right? When we pair that with the natural next step, then we're going to take incremental steps forward towards what it is that we're genuinely trying to overcome. So in your own life, the way that I apply this consistently is making resistance one thing. Making resistance not, oh, it's 5 different things that my organization is experiencing. Or in my leadership, I know I have resistance in trying to drum up clientele. Like right now, I just feel like my pool is really limited, and everybody that I have here, I'm already doing business with, and I just don't know how to get outside of this, right? You want to get as specific as you can to like what is actually preventing you from moving beyond that, because then you kind of get some reps under your belt, right? If you're able to address one of those pieces, then you can go on to the next and on to the next. And eventually you've kind of had to have an all-encompassing solution. But doing it for a smaller item, especially for those of us that will be tempted to move on quickly, helps us to be obedient and to be disciplined in actually addressing what the dissatisfaction is, right? Not having that shiny object syndrome and looking on to the next thing before we've truly addressed the dissatisfaction in the present. So in your own life, be thinking of specifics. That's the way that this tool really becomes a power tool for me, is in application. It's really wonderful to have tools like this and to have language like this to use with your team. But if you're not able to apply it and to actually do those natural next steps, then it just becomes flowery language that you have. It just becomes something that you have at your disposal to talk about, but not something that's actually transformed the way that your job is going, the way that your leadership is. So you want to make sure that you're getting specific enough, and also that there's accountability in it. For those of us that are lone wolves, if you're out there like, hey, I'm a one-man entrepreneur and I've got this business and it's really just me, you want to make sure you're bringing in partners and collaborators who know where you're at. What's the current resistance that you're facing? That's something that a lot of us giants will ask one another. Hey, what's currently a resistance that you're trying to overcome? And then figuring out, where are you at in that? What's the dissatisfaction? What's the pain? We say it in pain and gain a lot. What's the pain and what's the gain? And then what are you going to do about it? Right? So those are the questions. Even if you can't remember exactly what the change equation was, you're like Jada was saying, it was D and there was an N and V, right? What's the pain? What's the gain? And what are you going to do about it? That's how you're actually able to overcome whatever resistance it is that you're experiencing in your specific sector right now, in your neck of the woods. So yeah, that's the tool. It's a power tool, and you could probably chew on it for a while, but hopefully as Eddie, John, and I kind of continue to talk about it, it continues to come to life for you. But I encourage you, write this out, write it down, and make sure that this is something that you revisit every so often when you feel like you're up against a wall, but you're not quite sure what it is, or you feel like I can't quite get to that next level. This is a great thing to sit down with a whiteboard and be like, so what actually is the resistance I'm experiencing? And what is my D, V, and N?
10-minute masterclass, Jada, on the change equation. Thank you. That was fantastic. Eddie, what do you got, man?
Yeah, absolutely. Every time I hear you teach, I'm always like, man, I want to teach like that, because that is so clear. Something that happens often is that people have they have like almost like a need for a brain dump, and they want to be able to talk about everything, and their vision's over here, their dissatisfaction's over here, and their next natural step is over here. How do you create alignment for them to be like, well, let's talk about one thing? Are all these things, applied towards this one idea? How do you get people back on track?
Yeah, I like to revisit resistance. I kind of shared a little bit, but the more specific your resistance is, that kind of naturally is going to funnel down into what your solutions then are for D, V, and N. So if somebody is really scattered of like, well, my vision is all of this, it's like, okay, remind me again. what's the resistance? Like, what is the thing you're trying to overcome right now? Oh, it's staffing. Okay, so that vision's beautiful, but that doesn't tell me anything about what your staff looks like. Like, what does your staff look like when it's full? What's that vision, right? So it kind of naturally pares down what the other variables were.
Guys, we are at 11:20. Jada, we just want to thank you again for being with us, for spending some time just teaching us.